Well, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for coming today. We'd like to provide an update today on the status of the Commissioner of Education. Now, as you'll be aware, under the Public Service Commission procedures, ministers do not play a role in the hiring, transfer, or termination of civil servants and are not involved in staffing matters. So, as a consequence, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Ross Weber, Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Education and Economic Development, who will explain the Ministry's position and the status of the Commissioner of Education, Dr. Edmond Heatley. Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon. As the Minister introduced, I am Ross Weber, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education and Economic Development. I can confirm that today I received and accepted the resignation of Dr. Edmond Heatley from the role of Commissioner of Education. Dr. Heatley will work out a period of notice between now and April 30th, while transitioning his work duties to Dr. Lou Matthews, who will assume the role of Acting Commissioner of Education for the near future. Dr. Matthews will be supported by a team of directors and assistant directors, and this team includes Dr. Llewellyn Simmons, Dr. Freddie Evans, Ms. Laverne Simons, Ms. Terry Cox, and Ms. Chesia Calloway. They, of course, are supported by the rest of the staff in the Department of Education. The last few weeks have been a very challenging time for all involved with the education portfolio. It is important that Dr. Matthews and the entire team in the department get the backing and the support of education stakeholders and the whole community as we move forward with the progression of our education system. Thank you.
Thank you, Permanent Secretary Weber. I'd like to conclude by saying this has been a difficult situation over the last few weeks for everyone. I'm pleased that the matter has been resolved and hope that we can now move on. I look forward to working more closely with Dr. Lou Simmons as Acting Commissioner, as well as Lou Matthews, I beg your pardon. Lou Matthews is Acting Commissioner, as well as other senior members of the Department of Education in their ongoing roles. I also anticipate that the Board of Education, as is their responsibility under the Education Act, will proceed to address the selection of a new commissioner and make their recommendations to the Public Service Commission in due course. I'd like to thank Dr. Heatley for the service he has rendered during his tenure, the Board of Education for their diligence over the last few weeks, and particularly the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Weber, for his careful handling of what has been a challenging situation for everyone. We will continue to move ahead with education reform and the ministry's responsibility to ensure accountability and performance in the public education system. And I'm confident that we will continue to move ahead in the best interests of students and their parents. Thank you.
This is available for questions. Okay. Danny McDonald, I'm here to sign.
What's the timetable? Is there a timetable on finding a permanent replacement for Dr. Heatley?
Go ahead.
Yeah. The responsibility for selecting and recommending candidates for substantive position of Commissioner of Education falls to the Board of Education. They're the ones responsible for making that recommendation to the Public Service Commission. They are aware of this situation and they are already underway in their process of trying to find a substantive Commissioner of Education to recommend to the PSC.
Okay, is there, I mean, when do you hope there to be a permanent replacement? How about that? 6 months, a year, 2 months? Is there any, kind of...
Well, hard to say.
What's the hopeful timetable?
That's a question that's going to have to be answered by the Board of Education. Sometimes these things can happen quickly. Sometimes they take a long time, up to a year. But I'm sure there'll be some announcement or comment from the Board of Education on their process in trying to find a new substantive commissioner.
Why did Dr. Heatley resign?
Dr. Heatley did not prefer any reasons for his resignation, nor did I seek any. He resigned. I accepted his resignation.
If he had not resigned, would he have been forced out? would he have been fired?
I believe that's moot at this point.
Did anyone have that discussion with Dr. Heatley before he resigned, though? If you don't resign, you will be terminated. Was that a discussion that took place?
Sorry, there were two separate questions there. You asked, did anybody have a conversation with him? And then you asked another question. Which is the question you wish to ask?
Did anyone, whether from the Board of Education, yourself, or Dr. Gibbons, have a conversation with Dr. Heatley wherein basically he was given an ultimatum? If he did not resign, he would be terminated. Did that conversation take place? That's all I have for now.
Gary? Actually, Owen.
I like Gary. Sure. Yeah, thanks, me. Appreciate that.
Gentlemen, Dr. Heatley had complained, and we have confirmed reports that there was a lack of communication between your good selves and him prior to the 18th of December, and when the Board of Education went on break, Christmas break, if I'm not mistaken. And since then, there have been several reports of lack of communication between yourselves and him, and this is what will have influenced his decision to seek overseas employment.
I have heard those reports. I hear you say they have been confirmed. I find that difficult to believe because I've had several discussions with Dr. Heatley, and the issue of whether or not there was a lack of communication between Dr. Heatley and myself leading up to him. I'll answer the first part about myself. Leading up to his departure for the Christmas break in December are false. I can also verify the fact that we met and the Minister met with the full team at the Department of Education in Southside on December the 18th, and there's been several communication both prior to the change in ministries and after the change in ministry in that 7-day working period between the change of the ministries and then Dr. Heatley returning to the United States for the Christmas break.
I can also confirm that after the announcement of the reorganization of portfolios, both the Permanent Secretary and I moved very quickly to meet with then Permanent Secretary Warren Jones, and Dr. Heatley was part of those discussions as well. And those happened up to the point at which the entire ministry and department went on Christmas break. I think it was the 18th, if I recall. 20th. Was it 20th? Okay. But there was no lack of consultation in that period. And I think you'd expect that. We were responsible for a new department, a new ministry, and we moved very quickly to have those conversations. So I've heard the reports as well. I believe they're nonsense.
I know that you indicated earlier on that the ministers don't get involved in the hiring of people at the level of Dr. Heatley, but
or at any level.
Or any level for that matter. But can you confirm or deny that you were not in favor of Dr. Heatley being appointed the Commissioner of Education in the first place?
It's nonsense. I had no role in the hiring. That was a recommendation by the former...
I didn't ask if you had a role in hiring, Minister. I asked whether you were in favor of him being hired or not.
I had no role in the process. I was the junior minister at the time. The issue is purely academic at this stage. Dr. Heatley himself said, and I believe it happened with both the Permanent Secretary and myself, we had a very good, a very positive working relationship, and I think that's what the legacy will show.
The previous Minister of Education, Senator Nelson Bramman, had indicated that an audit of the public education system was being carried out and it would be made public. We are told that the audit has in fact been completed for the middle schools, but the ministry is now somewhat reluctant to make that report public because of the findings?
Not so. I think what we said during the budget debate, during the education debate, was that the audit, I think, was pretty much finished at that particular point. The results would be shared, as you would expect, initially with the members of those middle school teams, and that the results would be made public in due course. We see no reason that would change.
The issue of teacher transfers has again come up. We're told that the deadline of March 30th has come and gone, or March 31st has come and gone.
Do you want to handle this one?
What I want to just chip in here, this was an announcement to inform you about the resignation of Dr. Edmond Heatley.
Education issue.
Gary? This was an announcement to advise about the resignation of Dr. Edmond Heatley. We are not here to host a press conference about all of the things that we're doing in the Department and Ministry of Education and a variety of programs that we're rolling out. We came today to announce that Dr. Heatley has offered his resignation. I'm quite happy to entertain a few questions that are related to that, but if we're looking for a press conference that talks about everything that's going on in education, that's a different conversation, and we can arrange that for a different time.
Does the public have a right to know what's happening with public education?
Absolutely.
Well, then, you don't think you should be answering questions about public education?
Well, we have been answering questions, but what we're saying was the purpose of this press conference today was for the Permanent Secretary to address the resignation of Dr. Heatley.
Gary, can we move on?
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you know if any steps are going to be taken to make sure this incident doesn't happen again in the future, to make sure that people will stay here longer, do their job, and ideally not seek employment elsewhere?
Well, I think this gets down to the selection of a candidate, which, as we've said, is the responsibility of the Board of Education. In a large organization, I think you're always going to have situations where matters arise, and I think what we'd like to believe is this has been handled very well by the Permanent Secretary and others over the last few weeks. It's difficult. As we said, it's been challenging, and I think at this point we hope we can move on and put our full support behind the acting Commissioner, Dr. Lou Matthews.
Well, I understand the government's not involved in selection. Would that not be a contract issue? Would government not have some sort of say in that?
Why don't you handle that one, because it's...
In accordance to the Education Act, the board that's responsibility for selecting and finding candidates is the Board of Education. They select the candidates and they make recommendations to the Public Service Commission. It then becomes the decision of the Public Service Commission whether or not a candidate is appointed to the role of Commissioner of Education. It's as simple as that.
I think it was more referring to the stipulations of the contract that may have allowed him to seek employment elsewhere, that allowed him to...
I'm not really sure I understand the question. There aren't stipulations in a contract that say you're allowed to look for work elsewhere. I'm not sure what the actual question is there.
One last question. One last question. Do you think that the fact that Dr. Heatley has now submitted his resignation and a local has been appointed acting vindicates the individuals who previously suggested that there was no need to look overseas for a Commissioner of Education when there were people qualified enough to assume the role here?
Yeah, why don't you handle that one?
It's going to sound like a broken record, and it's not really intended to, but I will reiterate the simple fact that under the Education Act, the body that is tasked with trying to find and select and recommend candidates for the Commissioner of Education is the Board of Education. They have a set of criteria that they use, and they go through their process in order to put forward selected candidates. It will be up to the Board of Education to have a look at the job description, to have a look at the minimum experience and qualification criteria, and work through that process. Should they decide that they wish to change that, I am sure that you will hear from the Board of Education.
I thought you played rugby, Mr. Rugby. You seem to play spin quite
We
well.
have one more.
Is the ministry looking at using Dr. Heatley in any other capacity?
Well,
what I can tell you is that Dr. Heatley has handed in his resignation, and that it is and he will be working with us until the 30th of April. We are very much looking forward to using that time between now and April 30th to gain and use his experience and the work that he's already done, and make sure that he transitions that smoothly to the team that's left behind. So yeah, we're going to be using him between now and April 30th so we can gain as much of his experience for the benefit of the education system as a whole.
All right.